Thanks for joining us for another season of the Brethren Way podcast. Please enjoy this episode of the Calling series, hosted by Brethren Church Director of Pastoral and Congregational Vitality, Miles Larson.
Welcome, Brethren Way podcast listeners. I am your host in Season 3, Miles Larson. I am the Director of Congregational and Pastoral Vitality in the Brethren Church. And as we've been going through this conversation over these past few weeks about calling, we wanted to make sure that we got some sense of our bi-vocational brothers and sisters. And so I have my dear friends with me today, Justin Morris in Virginia and Jason Huntsinger in California. And I'm going to have them introduce themselves a little bit more. And if you fellows could you just tell us a little bit, maybe a few minutes on how you got here, kind of your call narrative, tell us your story.
I'm Jason Huntsinger. I'm over at Northgate Community Church in California, and I've been in this role as the lead pastor here for about a year, but it's not my first ministry role. I got my call into this role after being in full-time ministry for about 10 years, and I got my first call into ministry into a small church over in Hawaii as sort of a precursor to desiring to go overseas and be a Bible translator or do some sort of missions work. But circumstances kind of hit us, times changed. We did the whole ministry thing, moved around to a few different churches for, at 4 different ministries that I was called into and moved to. And I think it was after my last full-time ministry position where I kind of realized I was living in a bubble, that church bubble. And I had very little influence to anybody outside of the church. And so I moved from that final full-time ministry position into seeking some sort of secular job where I could be a light in the world and be an influence into some secular areas of life. And so I went into full-time teaching and got my credential in mathematics and became a full-time high school math teacher. So I'm bivocational now as a full-time high school math teacher. And as I was doing that, this position kind of opened up here at Northgate. And I was like, yeah, I definitely could do both. And I love it. I love where I'm at now that I get to be in the educational world with high school students still throughout the day, and then get to do some of the church work and be with church members the other half of the week.
Yeah, that's great. It's awesome.
Yeah, awesome. Jason, that's interesting. There's kind of some similarities, I guess, in my story. So I kind of, at one point, thought maybe I would go the missionary route too. I did a lot of team mission stuff with some other organizations, and then did some just through the Brethren Church, going to some sister church in Peru and Lima. And I was like, maybe that's what we want to do. God has other plans. I grew up at Mount Olive Brethren as long as I could remember. And at some point down the road, my wife, myself, and a couple other people started this ministry at the church at Mount Olive called The Gathering. And it was like a once a month kind of thing where we would feed people dinner. We would bring people in from the community. We would have a teaching that I would do. We'd have worship and kind of this whole experiential worship kind of thing. And it was really great that we got to do that and we're allowed to do that there. At a certain point, some friends that you may know, the Right Reverend Dr. Jason Barnhart and Tony Van Dyne, said, "Hey, Justin, we're going to be in town. Can we go out to dinner with you and Megan?" We were like, "Awesome. Hey, our friends want to reconnect. They're going to be in town." And then they took us to dinner and said, "Oh, hey, by the way, we got the bill and we think Jesus wants you to start a church." I was like, no. I don't want to be a pastor. I was working full time. I don't know if I'm allowed to say the name of the business, but it rhymes with Schmarize and Smireless. Yeah, cell phones.
Our very deductive listeners will be able to figure it out. Yeah,
maybe pay attention. So I already had a gig, and I didn't want to be a pastor. So we prayed about it, and God said, "Yeah, you're going to do this." And so we were trying to learn what it meant to plant a church. How did all of that work? And so, me and Megan and a couple other people decided that this is something God wanted to do. And so we found a place. We meet in a fire hall, and we started this church about 6 years ago. In March, it'll be 7 years actually. And so the whole bivocational kind of thing, and Miles, you and I were talking, kind of is was kind of out of necessity at first because we were a church plant. We had like zero money to do anything. And then we just kind of continued that model to where we don't have any paid staff with us, with me or the associate pastor, with Joel, with the worship leaders, children's director. Like, it's just everybody is a volunteer. And so we kind of keep our own, primary gig on the side and then do this kingdom work as well. So.
Yeah, I'm glad you both brought this up. I'd love to hear a little bit more about, Jason, you talked about wanting to have a foot in the secular camp, just light in the world. Justin, you talked about it being kind of out of necessity. You both have this sort of missional heart, right? At the very beginning, we have a lot of pastors and certainly the older model was you pastor a church, it's full time and they pay you and you do all the things. And, we all have different perspectives on if that's a good model or not, but you two have by design ended up in this bivocational thing. I think a lot of pastors sort of land there also out of necessity. It's a small church and maybe the finances don't work out or there's not enough work to do. Talk to me about that intentionality. Why do you think that's a better, if I'm not putting words in your mouth, why do you think that's a better model, at least for you in your season? Justin, we'll start with you if you can.
Yeah, and I'll say this just to kind of preemptively cover myself. I don't think that either Jason or I would say there shouldn't be any full-time paid pastors. Like, it's definitely a necessity, right, in a myriad of applications. For me, at this season, it's definitely not. The benefit, I will say, is there's a couple benefits that I really dig that most people might not think about. Number one, I'd have to be some kind of vocational anyway, because my church wouldn't be able, just the size of the congregation, just wouldn't be able to support me full time. My job pays me very well to do what I do, to sell phones, and it actually allows me to do stuff for the church. If I didn't have my job, I wouldn't be able to do the things and give the time that I can, because I'd have to be working elsewhere. So I'm very grateful for that. There's some other things I think that come as an added benefit. There's often, I've heard from pastors that there's, sometimes there's pressures with finances and how to, not that they have to teach just what the congregation wants them to teach or the tithe is going to suffer. That's not what I'm going to say, but there's this pressure sometimes to ensure, are we talking enough about tithing, to make sure that the pastoral staff is taken care of appropriately. And I don't have that added pressure to where it's not just something that's in the back of my mind. And again, I don't think that pastors are out there cowering to the demands of the congregation, but I do know that it is a pressure for some. And it's a tremendous blessing that I don't have that pressure.
Yeah, when your livelihood is connected to one thing. I have a friend who is a pastor who says all the time he's super grateful that he has other skills, because he's in a season right now where pastoring is just it's not appropriate for him right now. He's doing other things, but he has other skills he can lean on, which means he's not, I think it actually helps you steward your call, right? You're not just, oh my gosh, I got to find a church to support me. And now no, he has other options. He does those things that produces his livelihood, and he'll, be back in ministry when the time is right. But when your livelihood is connected to the people you serve, there's a weird tension there, or can be a weird tension there.
Yeah, absolutely. There can be. And I think that's a good way to say that for sure.
Yeah. Jason, you had said you wanted to get out of the bubble of ministry. You teach math in Stockton, California. Those of you who don't know much about Stockton, California, it's a pretty urban environment. There are some elements there that may be somewhat unfamiliar to most of our rural pastors. Talk to me about how that translates. How can you be light in the world in a different way than when you're pastoring? How does it get you out of the bubble?
Yeah. First of all, Justin said some great things there that I just want to piggyback off, but I'll get into the stock thing too. Being in full-time ministry. And first of all, I want to say, being bivocational, I'm no less a pastor than I was before. Just because I have another job doesn't make me less of a lead pastor or less of a pastor to the people of the church. It's just that I'm doing a job throughout my day as well, and pastoring in all the areas. I'm a pastor in my school too. The pastor is within me. I am a pastor by heart. And I think that's maybe where my biggest hang up with the church is that in this business model of church throughout America that we've turned church into, we almost feel like we have to hire a full-time pastor to have someone who is fully a pastor, but that's not necessarily true. I'm just as much now a pastor, and eventually I'd love to work to the point where I'm not paid anything by the church as sort of my tithe to the church, using my gifting to be, full-time pastor, but I can support myself financially. It's that tent maker idea, like that Paul style of ministry. But the teaching in Stockton thing, that is out of intentionality as well. I had a good friend tell me a while back, he said, when you listen to a pastor preach, think about how recent are the stories that he's sharing from his own personal life. And prior to being in this position as a teacher, most of my stories, when I was sharing them from the pulpit, were from back when I was in college doing ministry like on the daily. And I didn't have the fresh story of being out sharing the gospel with people last week. Like even just last week, I sat with one of my students and shared the gospel with them. It allows me to intentionally be in ministry with a people group that will never set foot inside your church. For me, that intentional part of like finding people outside of your church that you can share a fresh perspective on Christ with, because if we're honest, most people will never step foot inside of the church again. Yeah. But we have to go to them. So I guess in a lot of ways, it's that missional, like you said, we have a missional heart. It's being on mission daily in an American context.
Yeah. Actually, I think you've both done a great job of kind of highlighting the blessings of being bivocational. And I think that that's helpful for our both our full-time, more traditional model of pastors to hear, as well as the leaders in the congregation, lay leaders and just others, church members, because I do think that there is maybe a bit of a disconnect between what Jason, you talked about. It's like, it's not like you're a half pastor. No, you're 100% pastor. You just don't have the same time and reliance and those sort of things. Can you, and we'll talk more about that at the end, but can you talk a little bit about some of the challenges that maybe we don't see? Because I've been in full-time ministry and I've been in bivocational ministry, and they're different birds. It's not all the same thing. Can you talk a little bit about some of the challenges that you folks experience on the regular?
Yeah, I can go first on this one because I've felt the pressure of this one, or the pain of this one, I guess, more so than pressure. Most of the time when people want to go get coffee, what time? Like 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock? Yeah. All right, I'm working, and grabbing a coffee at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. A lot of coffee shops are closed, or people just don't want to meet in the afternoon. So having those coffee times I miss, and some of the community gatherings, like we have a local meeting of Love Inc. in our community where they meet a lot of the needs of the community, and they get together at times when I just can't be there because I'm at work. So, but the way that we're trying to work to sort of meet that need is filling the position of a community connector with somebody else in the church. I don't have to be everywhere all the time. And that's one of the beauties of this, is not all of the work in the church should fall on the pastor's shoulders. We have plenty of people in our church who are capable, willing, and would love to be in that position, to be in the community. And it makes it difficult, but there's also solutions to that problem.
Yeah. Everybody in the world has heard me talk about the benefits of sabbatical. And one of those is anytime you can create more space for more leaders to do real ministry, man, the church really does come alive. The individuals come alive because they get to do more than, manage a bake sale. But if they actually get to go do the hospital visits and they get to do the mobile shower and they get to see those relationships and stuff, that's the kind of the beauty of service and leading in ministry. Justin, how about you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Jason, you're absolutely right. Stuff happens, in the middle of the day where it's typically hard for us to get away sometimes. Luckily, with my particular job, I do have some flexibility, and I'm not with students all day long. So sometimes I can do that, but it is difficult. I had to do a funeral a couple weeks ago. I went to the funeral home, met with the director real quick, went out into my truck and took a business call, and then rolled in like 5 minutes before the service started. So it's learning how to piece stuff together during the day. It can be difficult, and sometimes we can't do that because of our full-time jobs with visitation or getting together with other pastors or other ministry opportunities. The other thing is sometimes I feel like those of us who are bivocational, we may feel more of a strain on the family side of the house. Jason, I know you and I both have kids around the same age. I've got 3 kids, 12, 10-year-old daughters and a 6-year-old son. And, whenever I'm working, they're at school, so they come home. And then it's like, oh, now I have to make these phone calls or I have to go to this meeting. Sometimes I feel like I have to be very cognizant. They don't take the brunt, and often they do, of dividing my time. So that's the challenge, is just the constant reminder of not only my call to pastor, but my call to be a husband and a father, which is difficult at times to manage. And I think Justin sometimes gets that backwards. So yeah, that's definitely one of the downsides of it, I would say.
Yeah, I think that there's a sense for some churches that when they hire a bivocational pastor, they would never make it this overt, but in some ways they just think like, oh, this goes back to kind of what you were saying before, Jason, about you're fully a pastor. It's kind of a like, okay, we get a half price pastor, right? Because it's like, well, he's part-time or she's part-time, but there's kind of this understanding that like, and we come by it honestly as pastors, we want to do the work of ministry, right? And it's very easy for us to over commit to, yeah, okay, I'm working 40 hours at my job and I'm working 40 hours at the church and I'm working 40 hours as a husband and parent. And can you kind of help us understand what ways do churches need coaching to realize that part-time pastors are in fact part-time, so that we can normalize the fact that pastors that are part-time aren't 40-hour-a-week employees? How can we help those churches and those pastors kind of protect boundaries for you folks, both encouraging you as the pastor to know those boundaries and help the congregation to understand, no, we get Jason for whatever the number is, 20, 30 hours a week, whatever it is?
I mean, I think we really need to be intentional with and adopt and live this idea of the priesthood of all believers, right? Like you said, Jason, I'm not the only one who can go visit somebody. I'm not the only one who can go to the bake sale or, whatever it is. And so I think what I try to do and need to do more of, I'm sure, is to say, we are on the same page here. We're on the same team. I am no different in the kingdom of God than you. I occupy no special space. We're doing the same work. And if we're doing the same work, then it is we are doing the same work. Yours might look different than mine, right? And so we talk about apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, teachers, and who are you and how does that manifest in your particular circle and job and day-to-day life? How is Jesus drawing that out of you? But we really need to recognize that the pulpit is not the divider between two different types of Christians.
Yeah, that's
right?
Good.
I love that. That's good. That's good. I think that's all key to it too, is, and our church, my church has been pretty good about just establishing what is the expectation so that everybody's on the same page. Communication is key. But I would say that's the biggest part to it, Justin, that last part that you said, the pulpit is not the divider, right? And I still lean on several people in our church whenever I do want to take a Sunday off, right? Like I shouldn't be preaching 80, 90% of the time. There should be others within our church that we should be developing in that ability to lead the church. I'm simply in that position of lead pastor. But again, it was like I'm saying earlier, I'm not a CEO. This isn't a business. I'm just a man following the Lord and helping to lead the congregation into a place of worship. But I'm not the only one that can do this. There's plenty of others, and I lean on them, and they've been stepping up to the plate whenever they're called on. So
yeah, I love that. I used to say all the time when I was in paid ministry that you guys are just suckers because you pay me to do the thing that everybody's supposed to do, right? Like we're all, you're exactly right. Like we are all called priest of all believers, equip the saints, all those kind of things of like, no, we all have a role. We're all, maybe you're spleen, go spleen, man, do the thing. And if I'm, whatever, I was fortunate to get paid to do that for a season. And I think you guys are both right. That is one of the things that I love about the Brethren Church is that it is that sort of flattened. We recognize, man, I ain't no priest, I've studied a little more than some, but honestly, in some of my churches, I haven't even studied the most. Some people that we have in our denomination and in our churches, they're just wicked smart and they know scripture, they know Jesus, they're wise. Yeah, we want to turn those people loose to go do the things they're supposed to do. How can we as a denomination be more supportive of you folks? Because we are well aware, many of us, or we are anticipating, I will say, that this is going to be more the norm in the future than it has been in the past. As churches continue to shrink in number and as just costs go up and how the world is sort of trending, bivocational pastors are going to become more and more normal all the time. As a denominational person, how can we better support and encourage y'all's works?
I have one thought, and if I'm honest, it's kind of what we're doing here. Jason, you brought up this idea that, hey, we're not really a half pastor, right? We do rely on other people to do that which they have been called to do as well, that might serve other functions within the congregation. But if the congregation has that stigma that we may be half-time pastors, it is possible that other people in the denomination have that perception of us as well. And so while we do occupy a different role, we have a different calling, a different model of calling, but our goal is still to lead people to Jesus. And as we encounter him, to become transformed in his likeness more and more as well. And so I think just by talking about it a little bit and saying, hey, these are our brothers and sisters, they're doing this thing as well. What are the similarities? What are the struggles? How can we talk? How can we help you? As we rely on other people in our congregations, we also need to rely on our other churches, right? Our brothers and our sisters. And I love partnerships. I love seeing where we can be of benefit to other people, and not going to be mad if somebody wants to help me out either.
Sure.
So I think just let us start a conversation about it, because if I'm honest, I've been brethren for 39 years. And this was the first real conversation I've had about this.
That's great.
That's good. Yeah, as I think about it, I think it's just going to have to come down to a whole restructuring of the church and the metrics at which we're measuring success within the church, and the expectations that we're putting on whoever the lead is in that situation. And by metrics, I'm just kind of saying, instead of measuring how well we're doing either financially or attendance wise, or even the growth or the size of our church, we should be measuring it more individualistically on a discipleship level. Who are you discipling? Because the further we get along in this, it's going to go back to the basics of, do you have someone to be able to replace you, that you've taught how to be a follower of Christ, and who's going to step up into those positions? And you will experience growth when that metric is transformed into thinking all right, if I can bring two along with me, who are those two going to be?
Yeah.
Instead of thinking on this massive growth scale, thinking more of a just small based, 2 by 2. I don't know. How can we be helped, or how can you help us out? Man, pray. We need prayer. We need to be covered in prayer and continue to seek the Lord on it. So yeah. I don't have any answers.
No, that's great. We ask the questions because obviously this is new for a lot of us, and those for whom it's not new, we figure you might know something about it. So we hope that you will teach us how to do things well as well. The nature of this entire podcast really is about calling. And one of the things that I think is true and clear, and not just of the Brethren Church, but rewind 20, 50 years ago, and churches were really, really good at that, at calling somebody up from within and saying, hey, you seem to have the chops to do some of this ministry stuff. And whether that person became a full-time pastor or not was less important than that there were people being called. And I think that we've kind of gotten away from that, and more people are transient now than before. And pastoring is hard, and it's not the most lucrative thing. And so I think you're right, Jason, about having to identify your Timothy, right? Having to know who are you pouring yourself into, so that if you get hit by a meteorite, people will be sad, but the church can continue to function and have the impact that it has on the community. So any final words from you gentlemen? Kind of junk drawer moment, things that we need to hear from you.
Just on that same vein of thought right there that you were talking about, Miles, in this next generation, the more I work with the next generation and the youth, they need so much encouragement to be able to step into the positions that God is leading them into or calling them into. More so than ever before, they need to be encouraged to say, you can do this. And then they need to be given the opportunity to step into that position. And when we let them step in, we've got to allow them to make the mistakes. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things for me in the hope for this next generation is that we allow them to take that mantle of leadership or that position of leadership and know that it's going to be messy.
Sure.
But we're going to stand by their side and encourage them through it.
Yeah. Amen.
Jason, I really like that. And I think you're absolutely correct in that statement. And the other thing that you and I have done, and that I think the Brethren Church is starting to do a really good job of is to not take those new leaders and to make them conform into this model of doing things. And the only conforming is to be done in the likeness of Christ through the conviction of the Holy Spirit. But we only call them out and call the Jesus out in them and then allow him to draw that up. And so I think that's a really important thing that I know is big on your heart, but we can see that. But yeah, I think that's of importance too, as we continue this idea of helping people hear that calling and then accept.
Brothers, I love you both. Thank you for your ongoing work, both in the kingdom and the world. That was with air quotes. Deeply appreciate your wisdom and your voice in these things. And we just pray blessings over your ministries. Keep up the good work, so to speak. Thanks, fellas.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Brethren Way Calling Series. If you liked what you heard, please like and subscribe to the Brethren Way podcast so you can catch every episode. If you have any feedback on the podcast, we'd love to hear from you. Find us on Facebook at The Brethren Church or email us brethren@brethrenchurch.org to share your thoughts and opinions.